This is a paid advertisement for Herman Law.
Welcome to today's program. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh, and with me today is sex abuse attorney Jeff Herman, a nationally recognized trial lawyer and advocate for survivors of rape, sexual abuse, and sexual exploitation. Jeff's firm, Herman Law, is one of the nation's most prominent personal injury law firms, specializing in the representation of victims of sexual abuse in civil cases. Jeff, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Walsh.
Based on your experience, who are the typical perpetrators?
So, interesting. You know, if you ask somebody, why do bank robbers rob banks? It's because that's where the money is. And so the same thing holds true for child predators. We find them where the kids are. Now, of course, there is a huge number of predators that are familial type of relationships and incest relationships, step-parents, and that's really unfortunate. But the work that I do typically involves institutional defendants. And the institutions that I see most times are the Catholic Church, by far. Other churches and temples, absolutely, there's predators there. Schools, Boy Scouts, foster homes, orphanages, any place where there's kids, there's going to be predators. You know, and people ask me, well, you know, why so much in the Catholic Church? You know, why is that? And unfortunately, what we know is that this is not a new problem for the Catholic Church. And for decades, even hundreds of years, the church has known that priests were masquerading as men of God and using their position in the church to get access to kids and molest them. And part of the problem is that the church has always believed in this secrecy. And in fact, there's what they call canons of law, which are the guidelines the church follows that requires them, the church, to keep things secret. And so for a predator, it was a perfect place to go, because if they had access to kids, and if they got caught, they would be protected. And the church became a refuge because it was well known that the church was protecting predators. They were covering it up, they were sending them to different churches, and so there's a huge problem.
Now, Jeff, when I hear you talking like this, it makes me wonder, are you attacking religions? Are you attacking specific churches?
Right. I get that question a lot. What I'm doing is protecting children. I don't care what denomination the perp comes from. I don't care if it's a Catholic priest, a Buddhist priest, a Jewish rabbi. If they're molesting children, I'm coming after them.
Well, you talk about religious institutions, but what about schools?
I see this all the time in my experience. I get cases, unfortunately, way too often where there's a man working at a preschool or a daycare that's molested kids there. And I will tell you, it's almost always the man who's working there. In fact, when I get a case, it's usually the only man working at the preschool or the daycare. And so this is a real problem. And I think parents and institutions need to be more serious about protecting kids. If there's a man working in a preschool, I want to know why he's working there. And I want to make sure there are no red flags. And if there are, I want erring on the side of caution and that person removed. Too often, I get cases where there were warning signs and there were reports, and the man was left in the preschool with these very vulnerable little kids.
You know, Jeff, in cases that involve public or private entities like schools, religious institutions, or scouts, do they have liability for damages to these victims?
Yes, they do. And these cases are typically that I file a negligence case. And a negligence case is premised on the principle that if a school or a church or a youth league has a special relationship with your child, meaning they're participating, then the law says that they have a legal duty to protect your child from foreseeable harm. We like to say as lawyers that the institution knew or should have known that this man was unsafe to be around children. Unfortunately, I find that it's a very common denominator in all these abuse cases to see that this person, the predator, has crossed boundaries with children. a man that crosses boundaries is a man that may molest a child. I think the best way to protect kids is to expose predators and the institutions that enable them.
Now, Jeff, I've been doing my research and I'm having a hard time getting my head around this particular stat. Is it true that hundreds or potentially thousands of priests have been identified as pedophiles in America?
Yes, there are thousands of priests that have been accused of molesting children in the Catholic Church. It's an astounding number. But my understanding is that 80% of the victims have not yet even come forward. That means there's thousands and thousands more of priests who have never been identified because there was no way for these victims to expose them through the legal process.
That's good to know. Now, I'm sure the information you provided today will be helpful to anyone who's suffered sexual abuse or knows someone who has. Can you tell our viewers more about your particular firm and how you guys are different from other personal injury firms in the way specifically that you handle sexual abuse cases?
Sure. I mean, all that we do are sex abuse cases. And so my whole firm is geared up to empowering victims and help them heal. And that begins with the first phone call. And what I know the most important thing to do is when that person calls me is for me to listen and to help them tell their story and to receive that story in a positive way. I'll give you an example. Someone where I thought it was not handled correctly and they came to me is a person called me and they were upset and they had called another law firm and they were explaining their story, and the response from the other firm was, well, why didn't you run? Why didn't you scream? And of course, that's an inappropriate response, and that's not understanding about why victims feel guilty and why they're compliant. Of course they don't scream and run, and we know that. But their story needs to be heard in a positive way, and they need to be reassured that it's not their fault. And so the first thing is to listen and to help them tell their story. And by doing that, I think they begin to feel this sense of having a voice. Ultimately, that's what we want, is to give them a voice. And so, and in my firm, everyone's trained to do that. That's all that we do. And I have very sensitive people and very capable people in my firm, beginning with my investigators, to my staff, to my lawyers. I have my own in-house investigators, and all that they do is investigate sex abuse cases. And so we know where to look for the files. We know how to interview witnesses. And so it begins there. When we file the cases and when we're proceeding with discovery, it's really important to understand that this is everything to our clients. This is their life. And so our job is to give them that security, to give them that empowerment. And I think because that's all that we do at Herman Law is represent victims of sexual abuse, we help victims heal. And I will tell you, the best thing for me, I've been doing this a long time now, since 1997, is that every year I hear from victims who are survivors, especially when they were kids and now they're adults. Either their parents call me or they'll send me an email and they're telling me how great things are for them. I have kids I represented who are now lawyers and doctors and therapists and just out there living happy and healthy lives, and their parents write me to thank me, and that's, for me, that's everything. That's so rewarding, and that's why I love what I do.
It sounds like the big reward. You know, if you or someone you love has suffered sexual abuse as a child, I want you to know that the attorneys at Herman Law are here to advocate for you. They dedicate 100% of their practice to representing survivors of child sex abuse in civil cases, and they've obtained hundreds of millions of dollars in verdicts and settlements in child sex abuse cases. Please call the number on your screen now. Remember, the consultation is completely confidential and it's free. Call Herman Law now.
Hi, I am New York sex abuse attorney Jeff Herman. Have you or a loved one been a victim of childhood sexual abuse by a priest or by any individual in any other organization? My firm exclusively represents victims of sexual abuse in civil cases, and we've been doing it for over 20 years, including representing victims in some of the most high-profile sexual abuse cases in the country. The New York legislature recently passed the Child Victims Act. That means that anyone who was sexually abused as a child in New York can now file a lawsuit and seek justice without the statute of limitations applying to their case. It doesn't matter how old you are or how long ago it happened. As a lawyer who has successfully represented over 1,000 victims of sexual abuse and in the process helped victims change laws, I understand the difficulty in coming forward and telling your story. I'm here to listen and explain your options. All calls are confidential. Contact me to learn more.
Welcome back to our program. For those viewers just joining us, I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh, and with me today is attorney Jeff Herman, a nationally recognized trial lawyer and advocate for survivors of rape, sexual abuse, and sexual exploitation. Now, Jeff, there have to be some warning signs, right, that parents should be aware of, those kind of red flags you hear about. Can you help parents understand what could be the red flags?
Sure. And actually, I even developed an app for this. It's called Safe Parent, and people can find that in the app stores. But what it is I went through statistically and I evaluated through all my experience, what are the common red flags that parents might look out for? And so I designed this quiz that's for parents to do with their children. And the quiz has questions. It's designed, you ask your child about a man who's in your child's life. I use a man because 90% of predators are males. It's a stat, and that's what it is. So the questions are, for example, does this man want to spend time alone with your child? Does the man coach your child's team and not have kids on the team? That doesn't mean every coach is a predator, but it's a red flag. I want to know why this person's coaching.
You look at the cumulative amount of these flags.
Exactly. Does this person offer alcohol or drugs to my child? Does this man communicate on social media with my child? Does this man tickle or touch and roughhouse with my child? Any kind of touching. Does he want to take him on overnight trips? You know, a lot of it's common sense, but people don't want to think about predators that were our friends in that way, you know, people that we know. You know, it's very easy, when you think of the word pedophile, what comes to mind is a monster, right? In a trench coat, maybe with a knife on him. But that's not who the real predator is that we typically see. And so the real pedophile, in his mind, loves children. If you ask a predator, would you ever hurt a child? They would say, no, I love children, because in their mind, they are being loving. And so they're usually the charismatic person who loves kids and just wants to hang out with your kids.
And I've heard that parents can't get their heads around it sometimes because that person is such a close family friend.
Yes, and the parents are often groomed as well.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you'll see the predator talk to these parents about how wonderful their kids are, and everyone wants to hear how cute their kid is. And here's the tough call. It's not tough when I say it, it's tough in reality though. If somebody makes you uncomfortable, remove them from your child's life. You eliminate almost the entire problem. Now, it's easy to say that. It's much tougher to do when it's an uncle or a grandfather or a coach. 90% of kids that are abused by somebody they know. Mm-hmm. It's not typically the stranger. You know, we used to grow up learning about stranger danger. Well, strangers can be dangerous, but statistically speaking, kids are more likely to be abused by somebody they know. And the way that this person, the predator, accomplishes that is they groom or seduce the child. Grooming is a process that a predator uses to gain their trust. It may start off with a simple pat in the shoulder, sit on my lap, different things to gain the child's trust. Once the predator gains a child's trust, they eventually lead it to sexual abuse. And so what happens is the victim becomes what we call a compliant victim. It means they're participating